Whoops. Okay, I'm gonna stop. And Bryn, I am going to turn things over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin. My name is Bryn, and I am the Education and Prevention Coordinator at Skagit Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services. Thank you so much for being here and making time in the middle of your day for our Respect in Schools, preventing gender-based harassment and promoting equity. Now, I'm seeing a bunch of check marks all over the screen, Erin. Do you know what that's about?
I don't know, but go ahead and continue on. It might just be this one particular slide.
Great. Okay. Well, ignore the green check marks. So we're going to do our introductions and then we're going to do our first part on guiding healthy relationships, take a break, and then focus on reducing gender-based harassment and abuse. Of course, they go together hand in hand as two sides of the same coin. I wanted to start by introducing my agency, Skagit Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services. We are the local agency for Skagit County for supporting victims and survivors of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, stalking, harassment, and elder abuse. And we also provide support to not only victims, survivors, but also their friends, family, and support people. So, it can be a challenge to, see someone going through something that you're close with, or you want to support someone, but you don't know how, or you have a neighbor, and you want to support them with safety, but you don't want to put them in more danger. Or maybe, of course, we're all professionals. So maybe in a professional capacity, you're dealing with a situation and you wanted to get some ideas or guidance or safety planning, you can give us a call and we provide support to what we call secondary victims as well. All of our services are free and confidential. We can provide them over the phone and in person. And in person, we can either come to your school if you're in Skagit County, or we can meet with people at our office. All of our services are available in English and Spanish and other languages through interpretation. They're available to anyone of any age, of any gender, without discrimination. The only caveat is if students are under the age of 13, they need guardian consent in order to work with us. But beyond that consent form, what they share with us will still be held confidential and not be fed back to their guardian. And a lot of what we do at our work, at our at our office is what's called advocacy-based counseling. And that has two main pillars. The first is empowerment, and that's because a lot of the abuse and violence that, we support people with is has to do with their autonomy being taken away or having control, having someone being controlling over them or their body, their emotions, their well-being, their choices, their sense of freedom. And we do not want to be another person who is telling them what they should and shouldn't do, how to think, how to act. So we never tell people what to do or give advice. We are here to ask questions, to listen, support, do resource connection, and to safety plan. So that's our other leg. One is empowerment, the other one is safety. And we, of course, prioritize physical safety. And we also ask questions and help guide people in planning for emotional well-being and safety, social and financial safety, a lot of other aspects of safety. So that's kind of like our one agenda, if we were to have an agenda, is safety. And just increasing their safety in whatever they feel, would enhance that for themselves. We can provide ideas, but we are certainly not here to say, you're not safe, you should break up with this person, right? So lots of listening, lots of empowerment. So that's what you can expect. If you do live in Skagit County, there's a lot of support that we can provide. And at the end of today, I have a list of other agencies that work outside of our county that do very similar work. So within our county, we do support groups for domestic violence, sexual assault. We do legal advocacy largely around protection orders or getting people connected with more like heavy legal support, like Northwest Justice Project, who's a nonprofit law firm that provides legal support, or Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. We also have a confidential shelter for women and non-binary people who are fleeing intimate partner violence and their children. We do medical advocacy, meaning we show up to the hospital for sexual assault exams, or if someone is presenting with injuries due to intimate partner violence and they're wanting an advocate there. And then what my job is, we have myself and another fellow, Ruben, our prevention specialist, and we are here to get information out to the community just like we're doing today. And we also, go to Boys and Girls Club, we go to schools, and we speak directly with youth. And that's a big part of our job is, having conversations about consent and boundaries and emotion regulation, trying to honor victims and survivors by preventing future violence from happening. So that's a little overview of my agency. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the scope of our training today and our workshop today, because a lot of this work that we're going to be doing today is going to be on an individual level. How can we feel empowered and prepared to guide youth and the social and emotional aspects of relationships and prepared to intervene on unhealthy attitudes and gender-based harassment? If you would like to supplement with some systems level intervention and prevention work, I have a QR code as well as a clickable link for our sexual violence prevention in schools webinar that we did in February. That one is very, at a school district, at a community, at a school, larger level. And I think the two pair really well together. Today, we're going to be thinking about how am I impacting, as an individual? How am I helping create the environment that young people are living in and attending school in and learning how to be a human around? Um, so for yourself, I want you to think about who were some of your role models and your favorite adults as a young person, and how much did they impact you? How many youth do you interact with on a regular basis, and consider that you can have as much of an impact that your role models had on you, on the youth that you see on a daily basis or a weekly basis? So just a little bit of a push, to take on this role of role model and guide and, protector for young people. I know a lot of us already have that in our hearts. It's what we do for work, and maybe leveling up that a little bit. So I have our first chat question here, which has already, I think we already have a lot of answers in the chat. So I'm going to pull that up. The question was, what is your professional role? So we have CPSD, and I don't know what that is. So if someone wants to come off mute and tell me, please let me know. Um, we have someone from the Bellingham School District. We have someone from Seattle Public Schools. Okay, now what do you do? The question is, what do you do? So we have a middle school health teacher, I have an intervention specialist, head of school district, director of student services, principal, K 6 to 12. Okay. Clinical supervisor, Boys and Girls Club. Welcome, Boys and Girls Club, you guys. School psychologist, school counselor, coordinator of health services, art teacher, coalition coordinator, prevention specialist, first grade teacher, substance use student assistance professional, K to 5, paraeducator, advocate for children and youth experiencing homelessness. Okay, welcome everybody, your individuals and people who make up the school community and the Boys and Girls Club community, it looks like. Okay, so we have a huge mix. Thank you for sharing in the chat. And I apologize, I'm just getting over a sickness, so it's going to be a little nasally and a little gravelly, but we'll get through it. Okay, so the issue that we're addressing today is gender-based abuse and harassment, which, largely but not, completely consists of consciously or unconsciously perpetuating the colonial subordination of femininity and unique gender expression. So it could include policing gender expression through harassment, bullying, and exclusion. And this can be done, policing gender expression can be done, you know, to anyone by anyone. This is definitely not something that we think of as, boys doing to girls. Girls do it to each other, boys do it to each other. It can happen to anyone by anyone, like I was saying. But a lot of it has to do with maintaining those colonial roles of femininity and masculinity and that really strong gender binary that, you know, has been imposed in our culture, either knowingly or unknowingly. And the other part is abuse and harassment of women and girls and people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, two-spirit, or otherwise on the, sexual orientation, gender expression spectrum, either specifically about their gender identity, right? We can see a lot of harassment, exclusion, bullying, those kinds of things for students who, you know, um, present differently than, we have come to expect or just at higher rates because of who they are. So we definitely see higher rates of abuse and harassment of, women, girls, and people on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. So my question for you, if you would mind putting it in the chat, is there any of this that you see and hear happening, either policing of gender expression or abuse and harassment based on gender identity, or you just see it happening more often? And while we're answering that question in the chat, so go there if you have some that you're seeing either at school or at Boys and Girls Club that you're hearing, you're seeing happening. So go over there. And just while we're getting some answers in, something that I noticed for sure, and just like higher rates, not definitely within gender, is when my partner and I were preparing to become parents, he went on Reddit and there was moms groups and there was dads groups, right? And he found the dads groups were very congratulatory, were very like, hey, look at the success that I'm doing, look at what I'm doing, like good for me, and all the other dads were like, clap, 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 good for you, like amazing job. And then he found the moms groups were very critical. Like a lot of the comments were like, you shouldn't be doing this, or like, personally, I wouldn't do it that way, and a lot more critical. So that's definitely an area where I see, just more, like negative attitudes within, the world of moms versus within the world of dads. So that's just a little anecdote. And now I'm going to have us I'm going to pop over to our chat. Okay, I don't see any answers. That's okay. Just something to think about. So this is the issue we're addressing, right? Gender-based harassment and abuse. And our first step that we're going to take is guiding healthy relationships. So a lot of the work that we're going to be doing today is based on a 5-year study put on by the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and it was called Young People's Romantic Relationship Research Project. And it studied about 3,000 young people, 18 to 25 years old, and something that came out of it was that 70% of these young adults said that they wish they had received more guidance on the social and emotional aspects of relationships. There was a lot more focus on, teen pregnancy prevention and, those kinds of things. And they wish they had gotten some more social and emotional guidance. And of course, we can extrapolate and imagine how that can help kind of prevent abuse and harassment happening in the future if we're helping develop those social emotional skills and relationship skills in young people on, a pretty consistent basis. So we're going to go into the micro, but before we do that, I want to say anecdotally, as someone who goes into schools very often, different classrooms, different school districts, what I do notice is this classrooms that are very comparatively structured. There's lots of learning, joy, and connection happening. Those are often classrooms where I'm noticing the teachers and the support staff are being very respectful and intentionally respectful, kind but firm with their students. And that, overflows to student relationship where that's where the expectation and the norm for that environment. So even though our goal is to have student to student respect, just like when you're, training a dog, if your dog is not listening, a lot of the times we have to turn it back on ourselves and say, how consistent am I being? What am I modeling? What am I bringing to the table? And so the overarching foundation for the next, part that we're going to jump into, guiding healthy relationships, is going to depend on you having a mutually respectful relationship with young people. Okay, so the first one is to be a romantic philosopher, and we'll talk more about this throughout the session, but asking questions, that's all it means, is asking students questions and getting them thinking, and getting their juices flowing, and showing that you not only care about their academic achievement and well-being, but you recognize that relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, all kinds of relationships are not, getting in the way of our academics and our learning. They are equally as important. There is, of course, a time and a place to talk with our friends, but that we are recognizing this is a huge part of life, and we are recognizing it such by giving it time. So asking questions, it doesn't really matter too much what the questions are. Here I have, what is romantic love? How is it different from infatuation? What is a parasocial relationship? What is platonic love and familial love? And, how does the intensity differ from romantic love? Um, just asking lots of questions of students. And students do love, in my experience, having these discussions and these conversations. And that brings us to our first little mini session lesson here. So we're going to be talking, I'm going to be talking to you as providers and as, professionals who work with youth. And I'm also going to have little mini notes here of ways that I, as someone who, has these conversations all the time for work with young people, some of the little mini lessons that I have on lock ready to share with youth. And of course, we can't have a whole range. If you ever wanted us to come into your classroom, you're more than welcome to reach out. But the first one is, what is the chemistry of attraction? It's really short and really interesting. And I think all young people should know this, and even adults should know this. Like, what's happening in our brains when we are falling in love or very attracted to somebody, we're crushing on someone, or we have a new friend that we're obsessed with. And it helps answer the question for young people, like, why is my friend acting crazy? Why did they totally drop me when they got in a new relationship? So, as you see here, there's a little piece of paper in the corner. That just means that there's going to be an accompanying handout for this lesson. So if at a later date you want to, pull it up, you want to have it for your reference, or you want to even post it in your classroom or in your space for youth to see, you can go to the folder that Aaron will send out, and you can have it for later reference. So that's what that little piece of paper means, and they'll be sprinkled all throughout our workshop today. I'm going to stop screen sharing just so that um, we can do the little activity, and then we'll jump back into our workshop. Oops, I gave you a sneak peek. Don't look. Okay, So, the chemistry of attraction, the question is, why can't I stop thinking about them? So, what I'm going to do is when we're attracted to someone, we can feel amazing and we can also act like a fool, right? Our brains are being flooded by chemicals and they make us feel and act differently. So let's learn about the chemicals and what they do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold up a couple of colors and you can choose to participate or you could just choose to listen. With kids, they love to participate and teens. Okay, so I'm going to tell you, I have my glitter here. These are going to act as our neuro transmitters, right? Our little brain chemicals. So I'm going to tell you about one brain chemical, and then you're going to tell me which color we should assign it. So norepinephrine floods our brain, and it helps create excitement, joy, and energy, and also racing heart and sweaty palms. What color? Red. Yes. Okay, so we have norepinephrine, and a norepinephrine is going all in our brain. There's joy, there's excitement, there's energy. We have sweaty palms, racing heart. Oh my God, there's sweat all over my body when I'm around this person. All right. Dopamine, a rush. Let's get our glitter up. A rush of pleasure, desire to go after goals, helps us be more friendly and outgoing. Gold. We got a consensus. Okay, so this is for dopamine. We got a ton of dopamine flooding our brains. Oxytocin, often present when we are touched or touch someone we love, including our pets, helps create feelings of attachment, trust, and safety. Green. Okay, so we have oxytocin all in the brain, which is a helpful reminder if we're having a hard day, we can go and snuggle a pet. Hopefully, it's our pet, not the rowdy neighborhood dog. Last one, serotonin. Now, this one actually goes down in our brains, which is kind of hard to visualize, but the drop in serotonin creates extreme focus, obsessive thinking about that person. It has us idealize them and minimize or not even notice their red flags or concerns of other people, like the concerns that our friends and family have about this person. And it also makes us unable to believe that bad things could happen or they could hurt us. Blue. Okay, so we have our serotonin is going down the drain. Isn't this helpful to know, right? Why was I making all those crazy choices? I shan't have done that, right? And the answer is it's just what's happening in our brain. And I love to share this because it's helpful for young people to know when you can enjoy it. The feeling of falling in love is one of the most beautiful feelings that we get to experience as human beings. The feeling of feeling close to someone, a new bond, the excitement, the rush, right? And we have seriously impaired thinking and judgment. And that's helpful to remember that we want to be maybe waiting to be making big commitments of, relationship commitments, of intimacy, and of trust with people until maybe some of those chemicals simmer down a little bit, right? They get really shaken up when we're first meeting someone, and we want to just get to know someone over time, allow time to pass, get to know them in different situations, recognize how do I still feel around them, as maybe 3 months have passed. And just so you know, of course, these feelings, if we continue to love someone, they don't go away, but they do abate. But it takes about 3 to 9 months. So that's a long time for like a youth relationship. And anyway, I love that lesson. So I'm gonna go into our screen share again. And as a reminder, if you wanted to give that lesson or have that visual up in your classroom, there's gonna be a handout for it. Okay, so there's our little chemistry of attraction slideshow. Okay, so next we're going to jump into discussing healthy relationship skills. So we can ask things like, what do you think a healthy relationship should feel like? What do you think a healthy relationship could entail? Helping to youth to identify healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships, either real or fictional. And if they're real or fictional, you can ask them, what do you think makes this a healthy relationship? So both helping to identify and build the muscle of recognizing what's healthy and maybe not so healthy outside, but also inside, how might it feel? How might you feel in the relationship? You can ask, these are some more questions, and this kind of goes back to being a romantic philosopher, just asking lots of questions of youth. Do they make you feel good about yourself? How do you know you're in love? How do you know if you're in love? What do you think is a mature way to resolve an argument? Do you think it's okay to break up with someone even if it hurts them? Do you feel like what is important to one person should be important to the other? And this just once again shows that it is an important part of life. You respect their opinions, you want to hear their thoughts, and it builds that kind of critical thinking and personal reflection of adolescents and teens. So, some ideas could be honest communication, jointly solving problems, managing anger, generosity. And a lot of students are going to, some students are going to get to the foundation of healthy and unhealthy relationships, and some students are not. And that's why I have these two little lessons here. One is on power and control, and one is on equality, right? So these are very foundational to what does it mean to have a healthy relationship versus an abusive relationship. And it's important to recognize, of course, that they're not like one or the other. A lot of relationships have a combination or, can be one and turn into another. So that's important to remember with students. However, one little lesson that I'd like to remind students and help them be able to recognize is both people being treated as equals, like both their opinions are valued. Who they are is valued. What they want is valued. Their boundaries are respected, right? So when we look at these ones that maybe students might offer out to us, like honest communication, or jointly solving problems, what's foundational to that is we are equals, right? You deserve honesty. You deserve for us to work things out and the challenges that we have. You deserve, to have an apology if I made a mistake or, jointly solving problems like, we're in this together. And so these are two little handouts that I have in the package for to be sent out at the end. The first is the equality wheel, and it just helps remind young people that at the heart of healthy relationships is that sense of, equality. And it can look like a lot of different things: respect, trust and support, honesty and accountability, responsible parenting. Of course, that's not always the case with teens, but they may recognize it within their own family dynamics. Shared responsibility, economic partnerships, negotiation and fairness, and non-threatening behavior. And then on the side of abusive relationships, what I sometimes ask is if I were to ask you to control someone, how would you do it? And youth and young people very reliably are bringing up isolation, emotional abuse, um, gaslighting, using jealousy as a weapon, making threats, those kinds of things. So they can really identify a lot of things on this wheel here. And what I really want is for us as adults in their life to help them connect it back to that abuse and control are, that's what abuse is one person trying to gain and maintain power and control over another person with whom they have an intimate relationship with, right? That is what abuse is. And to recognize that control can look a lot of different ways, and most commonly is not physical, right? It's psychological, emotional, isolation, and to help them understand that, why a relationship can feel really good sometimes and then really not good other times. So connecting it back to power and control as the kind of lying bad feeling that they might be having in a relationship. So those are two things that can be helpful in guiding kind of relationship literacy with students. And then the last one on this slide is distilling and sharing your relationship lessons. So some another finding from our study was that a lot of adults in, young people's lives feel like if I don't have a currently happy, successful, monogamous relationship in my own life, that I have no leg to stand on. Who am I to provide relationship guidance to young people in this way? And that's simply not true, right? Every relationship that we've had that has come to an end has taught us something about ourselves, about what we need, what we want, who we are, what we're looking for in the future, boundaries that we have. That is all powerful information. So you have every right, to, as a person of hopefully trust and respect in young people's lives, to be that guiding, uh, light if they wanted. And one of the ways we can do it is by thinking about what stories from my own relationships would be helpful in maybe sharing like a principle of healthy relationships or something. So here are some prompts for you. What have your various relationships taught you, right? Are there some relationships that taught you one thing, another thing? What was healthy about them? What was unhealthy? If they were troubled in some way, why did they become that way? Were there warning signs that you should have taken more seriously? And what insight have you gained about yourself? Those are just some prompts. I would say we as humans really connect with when a story is being shared. It's one of the most powerful ways for us to learn is through storytelling. So if anyone wants to think for themselves, if they have a story to share, um, we're not going to do it over the chat. I know I have our little chat box here, but just think about for yourself. Is there a story that you are currently using in this way to like teach a lesson to young people or share your experience with young people in a teachable way? Um, that you'd like to share with the group by coming off of mic or coming off of mute and sharing? Or is there one that you might consider, right? And we want to make sure that it's one that is, school appropriate and has an intentional lesson behind it. So, one story that I have that I tell sometimes kind of goes back to our neurotransmitter lesson, the chemistry of attraction. Because when I was in high school, I had a huge crush, a massive crush that lasted about 3 years on this girl at my high school. She was cool, she was gorgeous, she was an amazing dancer, an amazing painter, which doesn't mean anything to a lot of people, but for me, I was like, wow, she's so cool. And I never had the guts to go up and talk to her. I really didn't even know her, but I do have a very strong memory of being on a dance floor and wanting to go over and kiss her, or wanting to go over and dance with her, or make some kind of move. And I chickened out, and I kind of beat up on myself for that fact. Now, cut ahead a few years, I moved across the country to a different city, and I think a year later, I got a DM from her and she said, "Hey, I'm moving to your city. I don't know anyone else who lives there. Can I crash at your place until I find an apartment?" And I was like, oh my gosh, it is meant to be. The heavens are opening. Now is my shot. Um, and I was so excited. I made sure my house was perfect and I agonized over what to wear and, what to cook for her. And anyway, she showed up on my doorstep. I was so nervous. And within 20 minutes, I realized I do not like this person. And everyone is for someone, but she was not for me because I found her very vapid, extremely self-involved, didn't, have very deep interests. I found her to be completely and entirely focused on self-image and therefore very boring to talk to. And wow, was I glad that I had not made that move on the dance floor because then I would have sort of been committed, right? Whether she wanted it or not, consent issues aside, I would have made this big statement of, I like you when I did not know her, right? And so, what I ask people when I share this story is, what could I have done differently? Or, like, what could you do, to avoid A, having a crush for 3 years that you just pour so much energy into, or B, making a big grand gesture and then realizing you don't actually like that person after. And of course, students are like, talk to her, of course. So I encourage young people, if you have a crush on someone, if you like someone, treat them like a friend, go and ask them questions. People love sharing about themselves, ask questions, get to know them as a person, as a friend. And if it grows to be something else, wonderful, but just talk to them, you know? That's how we can get to know people and get to know if we really genuinely like them as a friend, as more than a friend, and only time will tell. So that's the story that one of the stories that I have distilled from my own relationship in my own life. And I want to check in with you. Is there anyone who wants to come off of mute and be so bold and so brave and share their own story that maybe they do or they would share as a teachable moment with youth? And it's a big ask. Okay, that's okay. No problem. Um, if you change your mind later, just put it in the chat and you can come off of mute and share your story. But just for something to think about for yourself, distilling and sharing your relationship lessons. Okay, so we have one more and then we're gonna take a break. We're doing great. Um, the last one is talk about what it means to be an ethical person. So engaging young people in ethical questions connected to romantic and sexual relationships. Students often like to hash out ethical questions when posed, and it can help them develop complex thinking, problem solving, taking multiple perspectives, and sorting out their ethical responsibility to others. There's often not a clear or right answer, and this is definitely not a test. And what we're trying to get at is what do they believe and value, right? That can be a larger guiding principle, but we can do so in kind of smaller ways. So some of the questions that we have here are what what would you do if your friend was cheating on her girlfriend, who is also your friend? Another question is it exploitation when a high school senior hooks up with a high school freshman? So students can think for themselves, and what kinds of questions you ask can just be guided by things that you're noticing happening at your school. Of course, we don't want to do it in a really pointed way with, the participants present, but are there things that you're noticing happening at your school that you can kind of bring up as a group discussion in a very guided and intentional way, or with a smaller group? A lot of times if I see a group of, three kids sitting there on their phones, I might just go over and say, hey, I have some questions for you guys. Do you guys want to chat? And then I can just ask them questions like this, um, yeah, is exploitation when a high school senior hooks up with a freshman? Let's say your ex keeps bringing you flowers. Is that stalking? Is it harassment? How would you feel about that if that happened? Um, Ultimately, what we want to get to is what do they believe and what do they value? And by we, I mean, what we want is for them to get to that themselves. Um, a lot of it is just developing like that critical thinking and problem solving. But ultimately, if what we're doing is just helping them explore what they believe in, what they believe and what they value, because high school, middle school, not so much, but high school, people are really, really starting to hone in on their identity and their values, their passions. Maybe not for every student, but it's very pretty common for that stage of life. And then it can help in the next section when we're talking about intervening if we have a sense of what they believe in and what they value, because we can then have kind of pull them back to that as a North Star and as a reminder and empower them versus disciplining or shaming them for, misguided behavior or unhealthier attitudes that they're sharing. So we can kind of pull them back to that. So just developing that foundation of understanding, the students in your class, the students that you're interacting with, what do they value? And then just empowering them and supporting them in their everyday life to practice that. Okay, so I'm gonna have us take a break. I would say um let's come back at 11:55. Putting in I was just gonna put in our group chat a question just to get the pulse on how we're feeling about our first module, guiding healthy relationships. Um, so my question is, how comfortable would you be talking to youth about healthy relationships on a scale of 1 to 5? So I'm gonna put that as well as the scale into the chat. One being not at all, five being absolutely love talking to youth about healthy relationships. And then why, if you want to share that as well, like why you would not feel comfortable or, why you would. So I'm going to put the question in the chat. Um, and then I also would just want to go over a couple of responses from before our break, before we move on. Okay, so off the bat, we have lots of very comfortable people who are like, yes, I love it. I love talking to people about it. Super comfortable. Someone says it depends on the group and child for sure. I have to talk to students every day about this, no problem. 44444. I think as a full-time teacher with more time to get to know students, 4 to 5, depending on the class, group, and or student. As a substitute, more like a 3 to 4. For sure, that makes sense. Kind of just gauging how, the class, depending on the relationship and what they bring up. 5, if the discussion can be tied to common core standards and district approved curriculum. Yeah, I get that. Wanting to kind of stay within your role and protect yourself, that totally makes sense. 4, depending on the age, I wouldn't be as comfortable with high school kids for sure. Okay, so it sounds like generally speaking, this is something that we're comfortable with. I'm so glad to hear that. Um, And then I missed in the chat from our previous discussion, and you guys probably saw it, but when we were talking about what are you seeing and hearing at your school or in your classrooms, in terms of gender-based harassment and abuse, a ton of people are seeing policing gender, which makes total sense. Sounds like especially among younger kids and maybe middle school age kids about girls are supposed to do this, nail painting is for girls, long hair is for girls. That's a boy's name, not a girl's name. Really saying like this is this and this is this. Um, and there was another moment that I missed where someone shared when we were talking about relationship stories. Um, Amy shared, no matter how long or wonderful the relationship is, never lose sight of who you are as an individual. So that's something that it's really important for them to share with young people. I love that. Okay. And then our last comment from Nicole says 1 or 2, if the discussion could get me in trouble with families who object, for sure. That's something to consider as well, is, you know, we may have a different perspective than a child's family, right? So just kind of working within your level of your sense of safety and professional safety, for sure. Okay, so we're going to jump into preventing and reducing gender-based abuse and harassment. And this one, I think people are probably going to feel more like their school or their organization would endorse them to do than maybe the first part, right? I think I might be wrong on this one, but I think there is a sense of if it's really focused on safety, right? And preventing bad things that we don't want, um, then it's part of our job versus if the prevention goes to the side of kind of going towards what we do want, that can be a little harder for us because we as a society maybe have less agreement on what kind of relationships we do want our young people to have, right? So I think we can largely say most people don't want, teen pregnancy, intimate partner violence, like those kinds of things. We can say, okay, largely this is something that we are trying to avoid and prevent versus what do we want? Like in the absence of, abuse, what do we want and how does that look and how do we guide them? And then we have different ideas on that. So I get that. I do. And I also think if we just tell young people, try not to be abusive or try not to abuse, it leaves a vacuum of what am I supposed to do? So I do think the first part is really important. And again, at your own discretion, and sense of safety in your own job and what you think is within your role and what you're comfortable with, certainly. And then this next part, preventing, reducing gender-based abuse and harassment, probably not so much of a risk, right? It's probably an expectation of our job that we are intervening and stuff like that. So jumping into it, clearly defining sexual harassment and degradation. So one national report indicates that nearly half of students in grades 7 to 12 reported experiencing sexual harassment in the previous year. Nearly half in the previous year, and then 90% of them said that they experienced a negative impact, such as missing school and no longer sleeping well. That is a horrible statistic. I hate that. And what that tells us is it's definitely happening more than we think it's happening with our youth that we're working with. I mean, it sounds like lots of people are working with elementary schoolers, so maybe not so much with elementary schoolers, but middle and high school, certainly it's happening, and it is having really big negative effects on their ability to be at school, which of course is inhibiting their academic and, future options, but also it's taking them away from their, the positive aspects of school, like resources and support adults and fun and connection and activities and ways to build their self-esteem, right? They're missing out on all of that if they're not coming to school. We know that, of course. And no longer sleeping well, right? That's a really big indicator of well-being emotionally is how well is someone, um, if someone's having sleep disturbances. So that, if anything else, should encourage us that this is within our role. Um, to be doing this work because it is impacting their not only with their well-being, but their academic, um, like their access to school, really. And of course, that's why we have all these policies around harassment and bullying and these kinds of things, right? It's our responsibility to create an environment where students can come to school and learn because they are comfortable enough and feel safe enough. So for this one, name it when you see it with discretion, right? Just, whatever seems like it would be best. Oftentimes, if you are seeing sexual harassment happening, of course, the next slide is going to be about contacting the compliance officer, right? And reporting it. Um, but definitely, maybe afterwards or after we see something happening, just pulling a student aside and saying, hey, you know, I just wanted you to know that that could be considered sexual harassment. And I know that you were probably just not intending it like that at all. You were intending it like a joke, and I get that. And I know that you're not trying to, get in trouble, right? Or do something that could be really hurtful. And so I just wanted to let you know that it could, right, in the future, or it could be really hurtful. So I just wanted to pull you aside and talk to you about that for a moment. So just, giving it a name, letting them know, this could be considered sexual harassment, providing definition with concrete examples, and that's what our next slide is going to be for, making it clear that you take it seriously and that you're open to questions. Encourage perspective taking, like how might it feel to be on the receiving end, and then check, as like an ongoing thing to just keep up to date, check to see if they have noticed any examples of sexual harassment, if they're hearing it, seeing it, just being an askable person. So this is one of our handouts. And this is just, I mean, I put this together, so it's definitely not perfect, but I put it together so it's hopefully for middle school students and up, it's something that they can comprehend. It's just an adaptation of standard, sexual harassment information and policy made so that it's easier to read for students. So sexual harassment, you have the right to exist free from sexual harassment. It is unwanted sexual communication or contact. If a staff member or if a school staff member was told or saw sexual harassment happen or reasonably should know because it's easy to see, the school district is responsible to investigate, take steps to end the harassment, and do their best to make your learning environment more comfortable, prevent future sexual harassment, and remedy negative effects it had. So just like standard sexual harassment policy, letting them know, and then how to report. So as specific as you can be, like talk to this person, talk to this person. Of course, ideally, any staff member um, they go to should know the policy and respond appropriately. But if you want to direct them to anyone in particular, you can write them there. And then who to ask if you have questions. It could be the same person, but it could also be you or a counselor or, someone like that. Could just whoever you're comfortable with. But this could just be something that you have posted if you would like to have it be visually available for students to see at all times. And then some examples of sexual harassment are sexual jokes, including sexual gestures or body movements, unwanted sexual notes or texts, unwanted touching, commenting about someone's body or development, sending or showing around naked pictures or videos, pulling on someone's clothing, like pulling their pants down, their shirt up, their bra straps, making fun of gender expression, pressuring someone to do something sexual, sexual graffiti, and spreading sexual rumors. So, not an exhaustive list. But just some concrete examples for students to kind of understand what we're talking about when we say sexual communication or contact. So Nicole said, reporting and addressing sexual harassment falls under mandated reporting umbrella, question mark. Um, Yeah, and then Clover said some of these could also be classified as discriminatory harassment, i.e., gender expression is protected under Washington State gender inclusive schools and law protected class. Yeah, okay, so um, for Nicole, reporting and addressing sexual harassment falls under mandated reporter umbrella. I'm going to answer that, and then I also just want to have Aaron and Aram on backup in case I missed or, I'm giving false information. Um, Sexual harassment um, from my understanding, does not necessarily mean there has to be a mandated report going to law enforcement or child protective services. It does not often reach that level of, seriousness where they're going to be opening an investigation. But it would be appropriate for notifying an appropriate compliance officer. So for sexual harassment, it would be Title IX, which I have here on this slide. And then for Clover's question or Clover's statement, excuse me, yes, so there are other compliance officers that may be more appropriate, right? For gender exclusion compliance excuse me, gender inclusion compliance officer might be more appropriate for like making comments about people's gender. And then there's of course a civil rights compliance officer if it's like racial um, or has to do with someone's like background, their identity in that way. Harassment, intimidation, and bullying compliance officer, or and then it's cut off on my screen. I don't know if you can see it, but 504 compliance officer if it has to do with disability. So definitely reporting and notifying the appropriate compliance officer so that they're we're not only saying, oh, I care about this and you have the right to receive education without being harassed, but also like we're doing something about it when we're seeing it and backing it up, because if students like there's no point in just placating students and saying like it's important to tell someone and then they feel like there's nothing happens when I tell people, right? So if you want to kind of have more information about that. Again, there's the sexual violence prevention webinar that I can direct you to that I'll have linked at the end of the training today. That goes more into um, policy and response and those kinds of things. But I hope I answered some of those questions. And if Aaron and Aram don't have anything to add, then we'll move forward.
Yep, you did great. And I'm adding a note in the chat as well, Bryn. So
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Keep your eyes peeled for Aaron's note. Okay. So for step in and stick with it, whether or not we have to make a report, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking to step in when we hear, when we, like, let's say if there's harassment happening, like, how am I intervening in a way that is effective, right? And then even if it's not like really like let's say student to student directed harassment, let's say it's just someone saying something that you're like, wow, that is so toxic, or like what a harmful attitude to throw out there for other people to consume at my school, right? How can I, tactfully, gracefully turn this into a teachable moment? Oh my goodness, so hard for all of us. So have grace with yourself. But I don't know about you, but for a lot of us, we freeze, right? We don't know what to say. We don't know how to step in. That is very common, the most common response from from that research project is that we don't know what to say, or we don't think that our input is going to be taken seriously or make a difference. And I'm here to remind you that 70% of those 3,000 young adults said that they wish they had received more guidance on social and emotional aspects of relationships. So even if they roll their eyes at us, or even if they ignore us or blow us off, they are hearing us. If we say nothing, it can be considered, like a compliance, or like we don't care, or like it doesn't matter, or we agree, which I know a lot of the time isn't the case. So hopefully saying something, right? Um, and it's up to you if you think stepping in the moment or talking to a group of students or an individual student later when you have had time to formulate what you want to say, or if you want to help them save face, right? Like not embarrass them. Or if, you know, it's just more of a private conversation. So if you want to have it in the moment or later, that's totally up to you. But I do empower you. Just try and do something, right? Just try and say something. Um, it does not have to be perfect, but intervening in some way. And maybe have ready some phrases and some ways of intervening that can help them absorb the message. Because I think our initial reaction, or at least for myself, is shut them down, right? And shutting them down is not, they'll probably not absorb anything or have a teachable moment. They'll just say, okay, well, this adult has a different perspective than I do, and who cares, right? I don't believe what they believe, and that's fine. But if we are trying to try and like, if we are going to try and like help youth grow and guide them, we do have to kind of be on their side in some way, or um, yeah, have some kind of positive conversation with them versus disciplinary. So a question could be, if you heard a boy calling another boy a pussy for like not doing something that they were peer pressuring them to do, we could intervene and say like, hey, first of all, please don't call someone a pussy. And also, I hear that word being thrown around a lot. What is kind of like the meaning behind it? And is that something you value, right? And to me, if someone stands up against peer pressure and trying like a bunch of people telling them what to do, to me that shows strength and bravery, which is, not weakness or whatever they can tie to the meaning of being a pussy. So, just having it be, a different perspective in that way, or pulling aside the student afterwards and saying, hey, I heard you calling, whatever, Lucio a pussy, and I want to talk to you about it because I know you value like loyalty and um, bravery and strength, right? And I just think that in that moment, it must have been hard for him because his loyalty to you as his friend was conflicting with his like sense of standing up for himself and strength in that way. Like, what would you have done in that situation, where like your two values of loyalty and strength conflict with each other? Now, I know that's, a lot, but just seeing if you can tie it back to what someone values or what to be true about them or something like that, just trying to like pull on the best of students, and engage them in discussion and have it be I don't know, like from a place of curiosity and growth versus discipline, might be a lot more impactful, even though it feels like discipline should be what we're doing. So the next one is for teaching students to be critical consumers of media and culture. I have a little lesson here on the manosphere, and we also could be talking about lots of different things. Anyway, before I get into that, the first prompt is how could evidence against harmful beliefs in the zeitgeist be integrated into your lessons? So you may have actual lessons, right, that you're teaching. You may not be a teacher in that way. You're an educator in many other ways. Um, Either you're, a student support specialist or, counselor or principal, but we still, our role is going to intersect with culture and relationships in some way. We are going to, at the very least, be interacting with youth who are going to be, bringing it to our doorstep anyway. Um, and how can what we teach sort of help ground students in some kind of like context, right? Or, generally accepted research-based truth, like if you're a biology teacher, can we teach about the two bell curves of, biologically, feminine, biologically masculine, like male, and how much those two bell curves overlap to help kind of break down this idea of women are this and men are this when height and strength and speed and body hair and testosterone all overlap massively, on a biological level amongst genders. So, that could just help kind of counteract some of the like resurgence of gender binary that we're seeing happening online. Um, and then helping our students spot and examine harmful role models, attitudes, and behaviors in our culture. So, like I was saying, we're going to talk about the manosphere on the next slide, which, if you don't know what that is, no problem, we're going to get into it. But we could very easily be talking about one of a million things, right? There's also just this like um, coming back to the female body and beauty standard of extreme thinness right now and letting students know like historically beauty standards have changed so much. Even in 2010 it was all about having like a big booty, and now we're here worshiping a flat stomach and thin legs, and so it's not you who needs to change your body, because in 4 years, there's going to be a different beauty standard anyway. So finding beauty within who you are as a person and how you were born, right? Um, so, just giving a little bit of context and information wherever you can, as much as you can. And we're going to jump into the manosphere. So this is something that I have been hearing about a lot, and has been coming up a lot. So that's why I chose this one. Um, the Manosphere is a group of online communities that push narrow ideas of masculinity and claim feminism is hurting men. They very often idealize wealth, physical prowess and looks, control, and domination. Um, It's often found by young boys and young men who are looking for fitness tips, dating advice, looking how to make money, or motivation. So I think it's coming through the algorithm to almost all young men if they're online. And then influencers are purporting to teach discipline, responsibility, and strength, but there are very often other messages such as men are victims, equality is bad for men, men should rule and to, the importance of being rich and alpha, right? Dominating. Um, when masculinity and healthy masculinity is obviously, of course, about, emotional intelligence and understanding yourself, mutual respect, equality, and real connection. And then at the bottom it says, question it, think for yourself. So this is just a little poster on some of the key tenets of the manosphere. And one of the reasons why people think it's like coming and taking so much space online is because 2/3 of young men report feeling no one really knows me. So this sort of feeling of loneliness, like why am I not, you know, making friends, having people be attracted to me, like kind of searching for an understanding for this feeling that they're having. And then I have a slim list of terms that are commonly used within the manosphere that it's really not exhaustive. There's a lot more information about this. So I'm going to go really briefly over it. And then I also want to point you to Aram's going to be having a longer training session on the manosphere next for Thrive. Is that next week? I think. Anyway, if I'm wrong, they're going to put the link in the chat for that training so you can learn more about it. And then I also just saw that coincidentally, Netflix is putting out a documentary on the Manosphere tonight. So, haha, you can go and learn more about it tonight if you like. Um, there are, it's a whole spectrum, right? Like it's not a centric community. There's lots of different iterations of like within the manosphere of what people believe. So one faction is like more red pill, waking up to the truth about women, which we're going to talk more about later. And then it's often tied to adversarial attitudes between genders or amongst genders. Black pill, I'm going to come back to that one. Sexual market value is, of course, just an objectification framework. I think that that's not new for a lot of us. That's something that's probably been around in our schools for a long time and is extremely degrading and just focusing on people's worth solely for their attractiveness. Looks maxing is the attempt to maximize physical attractiveness through going to the gym, grooming, fashion, what they wear, jawline focus, like having a strong jaw, and surgery. And it can reinforce body obsessions, hierarchy, and appearance-based bullying. And then we have two, kind of along that theme, a Chad is a highly attractive male, and a sub five is someone who's considered below attractiveness. And both of those reinforce social hierarchy language. Again, someone's inherent worth has to do with their appearance. And I looked in terms of sexual market value and like the whole rating system, a 10 is like unattainable movie star level perfection, which means that a 5 is like a 6 is still like the hottest person at your school. Like crazy. Like which means that people who are average looking are going to get a rating of like 4. And imagine how that would feel, right? As an average looking person to get a 4, or just as anyone, just any level of rating where you're inherently broken down to like this one thing about you is important and no one cares about anything else. And that's where we get kind of back to the red pill, black pill thing. Red pill believers think, oh, sorry, let me finish it. So hypergamy is the idea that women date up, particularly for resources. So they're gonna, go for attractive men, especially, and rich men in particular. Like you don't even have to really be hot if you're really rich. Um, and you can also note that all of this is based in the framework that like everyone is heterosexual and cisgender, which is not surprising, but something to notice. So going back to the red pill, black pill idea, red pill, the idea is whatever you're born with, you can make yourself more attractive and more powerful man, right? Like if you want to dominate, if you want to be seen as a strong man, you want to make money, you want to gain respect, you go to the gym, get a good haircut, work like that's where a lot of the influencer stuff comes from is like them teaching boys how to be men, right? In this very narrow way. And then black pill is the idea that whatever you were, if you were not born a Chad, like if you were born sub 5 in attractiveness, give up. Don't even bother because women only date up. So there are going to be no women who are interested in you and you have no inherent worth. You're not going to get joy out of anything in life. And there's a black pill term, which is lay down and rot, which just means like, yeah, like give up. There is no point. And you can imagine just the level of like despair and hopelessness and hurt and self-esteem, you know, vacuum that this creates in young boys and young men. So, a lot of concerning stuff here. Something to remember is that most engagement does not equal extremism. So, even though we can imagine a lot of violence, both directed towards self and directed towards others coming from these behaviors, the vast majority of engagement is going to just be consuming this information. Um, Not necessarily becoming violent because of it, but it can still show up at school in the form of normalizing misogynistic humor, dismissing consent, like this idea of like entitlement, peer pressure to dominate or rank others, and increased harassment of girls and LGBTQIA2S plus folks. So, um, my next question for you, and I promise I will look at the chat instead of asking a question and missing it. Question is, have you been hearing any of these attitudes and terms being expressed by youth at your school or at your organization? Okay, so someone's saying it's incredibly concerning that these are actually terms and phrases our youth are hearing. Yes, for sure. Um, Erin is saying you don't have to register for the Thrive session on the Manosphere. She put the link in the calendar, and just bookmark your calendar and click on the Zoom link. Someone said yes, they're hearing it. Someone said no. We have more yeses, 100% yes. Yes, but I also worked in a high school. Yes, yes, yes. I haven't heard these specific terms, but the themes, yes, and this will be interesting to share with our administration at our schools. I haven't heard any of these terms. Are they mostly online? Yes. And a lot of these conversations are going to be had, if they are being had in person, are probably going to be had away from adults because they recognize that, it could be considered bullying. No, but I'm sure they're being expressed to each other or online or in person. And new information for me, good to know, keep an eye out. Yeah. So there's lots of information. This is a really, really, really narrow look at the manosphere. Some strategies that we can, oop, some strategies that we can employ are partnering with counselors or, your local SADV organization, hello, hello, on digital literacy education, supporting healthy masculinity programming. Off the top of my head, um, there could be ones like internally with your school, and we can also link with other programs like coaching boys into men, futures without violence. There's, lots of programs that can be brought into your school. Um, I had another one and now I'm losing it. But, you know, supporting healthy masculinity programming, like anywhere where we can be having positive male role models, um, both in some kind of official role or just unofficially. Avoiding public shaming and confrontation. Like I was saying, people often will just, dig in their heels more if they feel like people are going against them publicly. Focusing on accountability and boundaries, and then documenting patterns, not isolated slang. So, not being too worried if you, hear one or two things that you recognize from this training, but if you're noticing consistently like wow, I'm noticing there's a lot more gender policing happening in my classroom, or, um, there is a real ranking system happening in our school, like people are putting together lists and names and ranks and that kind of thing. That would be really concerning for sure. So documenting stuff like that versus just one off the hand off the cuff comment, which you could you could still address with a student for sure. And then we were talking about before. Um, and yeah, anyway, that's all I'll say about that. Okay, so teaching students options if they're harassed. Um, Let me just check on our chat and see if there is anything else. Oops. Okay. My chat has disappeared, so I'll just come back to it later. But moving forward, teaching options if they're harassed, brainstorming with real life examples, how they can respond to harassment, responding youth semesterally, so pretty regularly, how to report harassment and what happens after a report is made. So just reminding them like we will, try and investigate. Both people are, entitled to know what's going on with the investigation. Um, and you may not be able to know this information about it, but just kind of giving them as much information you can about your sexual harassment policy and what happens and keeping them up to date so that they do kind of have some sense of hopefully trust that even if the outcome of the investigation isn't what they had hoped, that there was action taken. Um, because I think that's the worst disservice we can do is eroding trust when students do come to us with concerns and issues and feeling violated or feeling unsafe or uncertain at school. And then they feel like it falls on deaf ears or gets swept under the rug and we don't care, right? They're going to stop telling us about it. And then it's going to be happening a lot more. We're going to be having students not coming to school or coming to class. Um, and we're going to be scratching our heads why, right? So making it clear that you take it seriously and you're open to questions. Encourage and expect upstanding. So encouraging this idea of protect yourself, protect each other. Um, Something I often share when talking about reporting is snitching or tattling, depending on the age group you're talking to. Snitching and tattling is when you're trying to get someone in trouble. Reporting is when you're trying to protect someone, including yourself. Protecting someone is a brave and honorable thing to do. Brainstorm what barriers may be present to intervening and how to maneuver them by asking like what might make reporting hard and what could help, like how could I help, what could make that challenge a little bit easier. um so just kind of working through it and fairly regularly, like I was saying, semesterly, having those conversations with students so that it's something that if they hear it once, they're not going to remember. If they hear it pretty regularly, then it will be in their mind if it does come into their world, that at least that's an option for them. Okay, and then assuring multiple sources of recognition and self-worth. Working to assure youth have multiple sources of recognition and self-worth. Youth are vulnerable who are dependent on romantic and sexual attraction and peer approval. We're really seeing that with the manosphere. And so to help counteract that, we can work to build rapport, ask questions, listen, and invest yourself in whatever it is that they're invested in. It doesn't really matter what you talk about. If they're interested in it and you're showing an interest, it's going to build a bond. An example could be, I loved hearing your ideas today, Mina. Thanks for sharing. So just calling upon aspects of who they are that you notice that are not their appearance, or maybe are different than how other people are always interacting with them. Another idea could be like getting them connected with, clubs or programs or new opportunities. Like, hey, I know, you're interested in drama. There's this, play coming up. I think you would be great in it. Because just anything that tells a student someone sees me, and even if they don't want to just be thought of, can be really meaningful in a world where maybe they don't feel seen or understood. So And then encouraging hobbies and activities that build self-efficacy and self-worth. So self-efficacy being like, if I apply myself, I can learn to, be better at something. I can practice, and just this feeling of like I have control and I have power within myself, and I don't have to be good at something right away. I can grow. Okay, so our last question for our chat is, will you share a time when you felt that your caring made a difference in the life of an adolescent? I'm just going to close this. You can still see it, but just so I can, there we go. There's my chat bar. So the question is, will you share a time that you felt your caring made a difference in the life of an adolescent? So just as people are putting in their answers, um, Dana put in the chat, is there ever, I think regarding the manosphere, um, is there ever a point when police are involved? And the answer is absolutely, because this can encourage violence in a lot of ways. And I would just say for more information, if you want to, hit up Thrive with Aram, because a lot of, she goes a lot more in depth and her focus is on school safety. So that would be a great idea to like hash out police involvement and when to take things to the next level in terms of intervention for the manosphere. Okay, so for our question, a time when you felt like you made a difference for an adolescent, we have every day as I work with teens and children as a counselor, for sure, school counselors, offering before school connection times with choral students. For sure, what a powerful way to start your day. My role with students services provides the opportunity to work with kids and families daily to resolve issues they're experiencing at school. Our responsibility is to listen and hear what kids are telling us. That makes a huge difference. Wow. Thank you so much. A club member was moving and he came in with his mother and thanked me personally because even when he was having a rough time, I always talked about the good things, not just his mistakes, and it made him want to do more good. I never thought of that before they came in to thank me. Thank you so much for seeing this person for who they all were completely and not just their faults. That sounds like a really powerful impact. I tried to do act I tried to do kindness activities at least once a month with my school students as a school counselor. This has looked like candygram, kindness posters, sunshine boards, etc. So students get used to practicing kindness. When I see students graduate when their parents didn't and they're so proud of themselves. Wow. When I used to tutor after school, I always had a student who would go but do very little work. I always made it a point to greet and say hi and goodbye to the student. The students slowly started asking me for more help and to do more work. Wow, amazing. Connecting with kids with weekend food when needed and listening to their hopes and needs. Amazing. I had a student over 4 years, 9 to 12th grade, in an advisory like homeroom that met at least once weekly, and their interests and style were always different than their peers. Their style and even name preference shifted a few times. That showed up an apparent gender identity change. I stayed consistent with my engagement and demeanor and ensured they knew I was a safe person to connect with, and they shared that wasn't always the case. Teen years are tough, for sure. I like to ask my last question with students when we're meeting, what's something you're looking forward to in the next week? And to see them go from, I don't know, to actually having things to look forward to. Yeah. To get past the wall of indifference is amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. Um, I'm gonna close my chat and I do really appreciate all of the work that you are doing. And thank you for being here so that you can be even more of a presence for your young people in any big or small way that you got from today. So, as a reminder, you do have a role in preventing and reducing gender-based harassment and abuse. You are someone's role model. And if you want to do more work on a system level, again, here's the information for our sexual violence prevention in schools webinar. And I'm just so grateful for all of you. Just showing up today means that you are engaged and you are somebody. So thank you. As promised, I have our support agencies for survivors in at least all of the counties within, from my understanding, the ESD's purview. So Whatcom, Skagit, for Snohomish County, it's broken up between domestic violence and sexual abuse. And then Island County and San Juan. So um, I can't speak for a lot of these other agencies. I know at least Whatcom and Skagit have pretty robust prevention work. So if you are wanting to have in-class workshops, like, more of these conversations about healthy relationships, consent, boundaries, harassment, anything like that, please reach out. We can also do trainings for parents, for educators. And we can also, if you would ever like, just for your counseling team or anything like that, we can just do an agency overview so that they know how to get students connected with us. Or if you'd like brochures, you can reach out. There is support in your community for the work that you do. And um, actually, as a part of this slide, I like to just make sure that students know I'm a mandated reporter because we are having conversations about relationships and we are working on being safe, adults for young people. A part of that is that young people are going to start sharing their challenges with us, which is a huge privilege. And I like to try and make sure that I maintain their trust and allow for them to make informed decisions by letting students know at about middle school and above that I'm mandated reporter and what that means, and that if they ever need to talk to someone, and they're worried about a report being made, because that's a very real concern that is preventing students from getting support around sexual abuse and domestic violence, ways that they can access support that won't automatically trigger an investigation, right? Because that can be, we would rather them get some support than no support at all. So you can direct us, you can direct them to these agencies and let them know that they can contact us anonymously and speak with an advocate. Um, at least for us, we have a 24-hour hotline. They can just call and without sharing identifying information, talk with an advocate and do some safety planning or just get support or just share their story or just learn what would happen if they were to tell someone. Um, and then of course, all the other loopholes and backbendy stuff, like, you know, having hypothetical conversations, like, my friend is going through this, right? And keeping their themselves anonymous in that way. So, um, just a note on mandated reporting. And I'm going to leave my contact information here. Please reach out if you have any requests in terms of prevention in Skagit County or you have any questions following this presentation. And I'm going to bump back over to the chat. Um, do, 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 do. Okay, so Alyssa wants to know if we get a certificate or email stating that we were attending. Um, Erin will have the information for that. And Erin is also letting you know that materials will be emailed shortly for your use. You will also receive an email to prompt you to complete a course evaluation.